they will write about the gown tomorrow. The gold. The tiara. The way the light caught her hair, like something planned by a painter rather than an evening circumstance. The newspapers will print the photographs, and people will study them over coffee and say stunning and radiant and every word that costs nothing because it asks nothing. They will not write about what I saw. I was stationed 12 feet from the entrance of the ballroom of state when she arrived. My job was ceremonial, upright, eyes forward, invisible in the way that palace officers are trained to be invisible. We are furniture with a pulse. We notice everything and report nothing, unless something goes wrong. That night, nothing went wrong. That is not the same as saying nothing happened. She paused, barely, maybe half a breath, at the top of the stairs. Not from hesitation. Not from nerves. It was something else. Something I've turned over in the years since, the way you turn a stone you found on a beach and can't quite leave behind. She paused the way a person pauses when they have decided something. When the deciding is finally done and what remains is only the doing. I have stood in rooms with heads of state. I have watched generals receive news of casualties without their faces moving. I have observed the architecture of composure in human beings under conditions that would flatten most people entirely. What Catherine did at the top of those stairs was different. It wasn't armor. Armor is visible, you can see where it sits heavy on a person's shoulders, or it pulls at the jaw, where the eyes go distant and the smile becomes something laminated rather than lived. Armor is what people wear when they are afraid. This was not armor. This was decision. And, 12 feet away, supposedly furniture, felt it land in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. By the time she descended, she was already the room. Every camera, every diplomat, every silk-suited guest with a crystal glass suspended halfway to their lips. The gold caught the chandelier. The tiara sat like something she'd been born wearing, which I understand is precisely the point. Her hair, warm and loose at the ends, moved once in the draft from the opening doors and, then, was still. She smiled at the first dignitary. Genuine. Present. Here. I had spent 3 years in this role by then. I had watched hundreds of public figures enter hundreds of rooms and perform hundreds of versions of themselves for hundreds of audiences. I had never, before that night, watched someone arrive. This is not a story about a gown. Or a tiara. Or the particular quality of light in a palace ballroom on a winter evening when the chandeliers are all burning and the world outside is dark and cold and indifferent. This is a story about what it costs to stand at the top of a staircase and choose, with everything watching, to be exactly, completely, irreducibly yourself. I'm not sure I could have done it. I'm not sure most people could. That's the part they won't print tomorrow. That's the part that kept me awake long after the ballroom emptied and the gold gown became a photograph and the woman inside it went back to whatever room the palace assigns to the private business of being human. She paused at the top of those stairs. I think about it still. The briefing was at 4:30. Not unusual. State dinners always require a full operational walkthrough, entry sequences, seating adjacencies, medical access routes, the particular anxiety of coordinating an evening in which everyone is dressed in something that costs more than a year of my salary and nobody is supposed to spill anything, fall, or say the wrong name to the wrong face. I had done this 11 times. I had a system. I had a laminated card in my left breast pocket with the phonetic spellings of every foreign dignitary's surname, because I had learned the hard way a Tuesday in March, 2 years prior, a Latvian trade minister, the sound my supervisor's soul made leaving his body, that assumptions are the enemy of the ceremonial role. The briefing said nothing unusual about the princess. That should have been my first indication. In my experience, the things nobody mentions are the things that matter. The rooms they don't show you on the floor plan. The guests with the blankly pleasant PR handlers hovering 2 steps behind. The scheduled moments that run 7 minutes longer than the schedule suggests because something underneath the schedule is doing more work than the schedule is willing to admit. Nobody mentioned that she had been photographed 3 days earlier leaving a hospital. I found that out much later, in the way you find things out when you are furniture, you are present when people forget you are there. Her team arrived first. They always do. The advance group, 2 women I'd come to recognize over the years, efficient in that particular way that reads as warmth until you watch them work, at which point it reads correctly as extraordinary competence wearing warmth as a professional courtesy. They walked the room. They checked sightlines, the height of floral arrangements, the specific angle of the chair nearest the British ambassador's table. One of them stopped and adjusted a candle holder by perhaps 2 centimeters. I watched her do it. Something in the precision of that small adjustment, the care in it, the refusal to accept almost right, lodged itself somewhere behind my sternum and stayed there for the rest of the night. Catherine arrived at 7:14, 2 minutes ahead of the published schedule. I was at my post by the entrance. My eyes were forward, as trained. But I am not actually furniture, and no amount of professional conditioning fully closes the peripheral field of a human being when something in that field sends a signal that the brain classifies, before the conscious mind catches up, as significant. The gown was gold. Not yellow, not champagne, not the polite approximation of gold that fabric often produces in fluorescent light. This was the real color, warm, deep, the kind that makes the light around it reorganize. It moved with her. Not behind her, not separately, but with her, as though the dress had been involved in negotiations rather than merely fitted. The tiara, and I have stood in rooms with tiaras before, so I am not easily impressed by tiaras, sat with such settled authority on her hair that it stopped looking like an object and started looking like a statement. I did not think any of this at the time in such articulate terms. What I thought, in the half-second my peripheral field took to process what it was seeing and route the signal to language, was something considerably less eloquent. Something closer to, oh. She moved across the antechamber with the first diplomatic pair, a greeting that looked spontaneous and had almost certainly been choreographed to the syllable, and I watched, from my 12 feet of professional distance, the way she held herself. There is a word people use for it that I have always found reductive: poise. As if balance were the whole story. As if the stillness in a person's spine were simply a matter of posture rather than a matter of deciding, over and over again, in the small continuous referendum of a public evening, not to let what is heavy on the inside alter what is visible on the outside. I didn't know about the hospital then. I didn't know about the months. I didn't know what the gown was, structurally, emotionally, what it meant to choose gold when you might reasonably have chosen to be somewhere quiet, somewhere small, somewhere no camera could construct a narrative from the angle of your jaw or the set of your shoulders. What I knew was this: she stopped. 3 exchanges into the receiving line, a Belgian official, a Commonwealth secretary, a woman in green. The first didn't recognize. She stopped, in the middle of a laugh at something the Belgian official had said, a real laugh, the involuntary kind that scrunches the nose, and, for one unscheduled, unlaminated, non-floor plan moment, she was just a person laughing at something genuinely funny. And then, the moment passed, the receiving line moved, and she went with it. But the Belgian official stood 2 seconds longer than he should have after she moved on. 2 seconds. That's nothing in clock time. In diplomatic receiving line time, it's an eternity. He stood there the way people stand when something has surprised them into stillness. Then, his handler touched his elbow and he rejoined the sequence of the evening. I noted this. I note everything. It's the job. What I have never been entirely able to categorize, and I have tried, over the years, because I am the kind of person who categorizes things, who keeps personal logs, who returns to unexplained data the way a tongue returns to a loose tooth, is whether what he was standing in for those 2 seconds was admiration or recognition. Recognition of what? I couldn't have told you then. I was learning it in real time. The dinner began at 8. I was stationed near the Eastern Service corridor, not in the ballroom itself, but within sightline of the main table through the service door, which is left at a precise 3-inch gap for reasons of both ventilation and visibility that I will not explain except to say, the palace is a building that has been thinking about contingencies for longer than most governments have existed. Through that 3-inch gap, at intervals between my actual duties, I watched her work the table. That is the only word for it. Work. Not perform. Not endure. Work, in the sense of something requiring real exertion, attention, memory, genuine interest summoned on demand, the skill of making 11 different people across the span of a long dinner each feel, in their turn, that they are the most interesting person in the room. I have seen politicians do a version of this. It usually looks like politics. This looked like something else. It looked like someone who had decided, at the top of those stairs, in that half-breath pause, before she descended, that if she was going to be here, she was going to be here. All the way. Nothing rationed, nothing performed, nothing given at a discount because the evening was long or the dress was heavy or there were things, behind the eyes, that a gold gown cannot actually cover, no matter how well it is made. At 9:47, between the main course and what I understood to be a dessert involving something architectural and, probably French, she excused herself from the table. Her senior aide met her at the edge of the room. I was close enough to hear 3 words. Just 3, before they moved out of range. She said, "I'm all right." Not to reassure. Not to deflect. The way you say something true that you didn't expect to still be true, that costs you a small, private, specific thing to admit. "I'm all right." The aide nodded. They stood there not long, barely a breath, and then she turned and walked back to the table. The gold caught the chandelier again. She sat down and asked the minister to her left something that made him lean forward, suddenly, animated, suddenly, certain he was the most interesting person in the room. I went back to my post. I wrote "I'm all right" in my log that night in the margin, with no annotation. Some things are their own annotation. There is a room behind the room. Every large public space has one in the functional, graceless corridor of the real, running parallel to the curated version that the world sees. In palaces, these spaces are especially stark in their contrast. Whitewashed service walls against gilded ballrooms. Fluorescent utility against candlelight. The wiring exposed where the plasterwork hides it on the other side. I have spent most of my career in the room behind the room. This is relevant. At 9:52, I was in the service corridor running adjacent to the east wing with drawing rooms when I nearly collided with a woman carrying what I can only describe as a structural crisis. She was perhaps 60, with the bearing of someone who had been arranging the invisible architecture of important evenings for so long that she had absorbed the infrastructure into her posture. She was holding a garment bag, a small velvet case, a phone with 3 active notifications visible on its screen, and an expression that I recognized from the mirror on difficult mornings. She did not break stride. She assessed me in approximately 1 second: uniform, station, clearance level, and continued past. "Bustle support," she said, by way of explanation for the garment bag, which I had not asked for. I turned and watched her disappear around the corridor's bend. I have thought about this woman many times since that night. She had no name, from my perspective. She existed in my log as a notation in the margin of a larger evening. But she had been building something, for years, probably, that made it possible for another woman to stand at the top of a staircase and be the room. The behind-the-room work. The invisible architecture. I do not know why this stays with me the way it does. I think it is because I am, myself, a behind-the-room person. And I know what it costs: the care of it, the craft of it, the specific loneliness of doing something excellently that will never appear in any photograph. The dinner resumed. I know this because at 10:03 my radio produced a 2-click signal that meant the main course was cleared and the evening was proceeding within acceptable parameters. I know this because acceptable parameters are a thing I monitor. This is the job. What the job does not technically require me to monitor: the small girl. She appeared in my corridor at approximately 10:11. 8 years old, possibly 9. She was wearing a dress that suggested she had been included in the evening in some semi-official capacity: flower girl at an earlier ceremony, perhaps, or the child of a dignitary, cleared and vetted and, now, past her sustainable operating hour, engaged in a slow private campaign against the concept of bedtime. She was walking the corridor with the specific gait of a child who is not quite lost but is definitely not supervised, trailing one hand along the wall with an expression of total self-possession that I recognized as the face children make when they are performing independence and have not yet noticed how loudly it broadcasts its own insecurity. She rounded the corner and stopped when she saw me. I stopped too. This is, technically, not my area of responsibility. Children at state events are the responsibility of the family liaison officer, whose station was on the north end, while outside my operational zone. I have a niece. She is 7. She makes the same exact face when she is trying not to be taken to bed. Are you lost? I asked. No, she said, with magnificent certainty. Right, I said. We regarded each other. Why are you standing there? She asked. My job. What's your job? Making sure nothing goes wrong. She considered this. Her left hand was still trailing the wall. Her right hand, I noticed, was holding a small piece of what appeared to be the architectural French dessert, wrapped in a napkin, with the care of someone transporting something irreplaceable. Has anything gone wrong? She asked. Not so far. Good, she said. She seemed genuinely pleased by this. Then, I saw the princess. I said nothing. I am trained to say nothing in response to statements that do not require a response. She's very beautiful, the girl said, with the matter-of-fact authority of a child delivering a verdict. But, not like a painting. More like. She paused, working on it. Her hand stopped on the wall. More like when something is real. I have a personal log. I have kept it for 11 years. I note things. Operational details, timing irregularities, the phonetic spelling of a Latvian surname. That night I wrote this down in the margin. More like when something is real. I eventually found the family liaison officer, who found the child's mother, who retrieved the child with an apology that I waved off and a look of bone-deep parental exhaustion that I received with genuine sympathy. The French dessert survived the journey intact, which the girl seemed to consider the most important outcome of the evening. I went back to my post. The formal program ended at 11:15. The thing about state dinners is that they do not, technically, end at 11:15. 11:15 is when the program ends. The dinner ends, the actual dinner, the human one, the conversations that outlast the speeches and the protocol and the laminated schedule, considerably later, and in a different key. The formality bleeds out of the room, slowly, like color from fabric and water. People stop performing their roles and start being people who have spent an evening in a particular room together and feel, however, briefly, that this means something. I was doing a final perimeter check when I passed the door of the blue drawing room. It was open 3 inches. Inside, 2 women sitting across from each other in chairs angled toward a cold fireplace. Shoes off. The tiara was gone. Her hair, without it, moved the way hair moves when it has been released from something with the memory of its earlier shape still in it, slowly unfurling. The other woman, her private secretary, I believe, from previous encounters, was telling a story that involved her hands moving in large, cartoonish gestures that suggested either an anecdote about a narrow escape or a very bad parking experience. Catherine, and I am aware that I am using her name here in a way that is not operationally appropriate, in a way that reflects something I have not entirely made my peace with, Catherine was laughing. Not the receiving line laugh. Not the one calibrated for a room. The real one. The one that scrunches the nose. I kept walking. A 3-inch gap in a door is not surveillance. It is, I have told myself this, I continue to tell myself this, simply the palace breathing. I did not write this in my log. Some things are not for the margin. Some things you carry differently. Not in ink. Not in the laminated card, phonetic spelling, operational notation part of you. In the other part. The part that knows the difference between a woman wearing a tiara and a woman who has spent a very long, very full, very human evening and has now taken the tiara off and is laughing, really laughing, in a room where nobody is watching except the cold fireplace and the woman who has known her long enough not to count. I walked to the end of the corridor. I did not look back. The morning after a state dinner, the palace does not sleep in. I have heard from people who have not worked the overnight that these buildings, after the guests depart and the floral arrangements are broken down and the crystal inventory is conducted and the service staff have completed their post-event debrief and gone home, these buildings must feel empty. They don't. They feel like the inside of a held breath. I filed my operational report at 12:43. Routine. Procedural. I noted the garment bag woman, because unusual personnel movements are standard notation. I did not note the child with the French dessert, because she did not constitute an unusual personnel movement so much as a small human behaving exactly as small humans behave when left unsupervised in a corridor past their operational hour. I did not note the 3-inch door. I went home. I had 6 hours before my next rotation. I did not sleep. This is not unusual for me after an evening with significant observational load. My brain is, in the clinical vocabulary of the assessment I was required to take after a significant incident in 2019 that I will not describe except to say it involved a fire exit, a Belgian trade delegation, and a decision I made in approximately 4 seconds that my supervisor still uses as a training example. My brain is, according to that assessment, an integrative processor, which is a polite way of saying it keeps working after I tell it to stop. I lay in the dark and I thought about gold. Not the gown specifically. The concept. The color. What it means, what we have decided it means, across the long human span of deciding what things mean, to put on gold when you are struggling. To choose brightness when you are diminished. To show up, Tiara and all, when the easier thing and, perhaps the more honest thing would be to say, not tonight, the world is heavy, I am doing the difficult work of being a person and, I cannot also be a symbol right now. She could have said that. I do not know if she wanted to. I am not in a position to know what she wanted. What I know is what I saw. There is a category of observation that my training covers only obliquely. The documentation calls it behavioral resilience indicators, which is the operational language for how do you recognize when a person is doing something that costs them more than it appears to cost them, and doing it anyway, without the cost showing. The training exists because it is relevant to threat assessment. A person behaving normally under abnormal internal conditions is a variable worth tracking. I had tracked it before. I had flagged it before. In those contexts, the behavioral resilience indicator was a warning sign. That night, it was something else. It was, and, I am aware this is not operational language, I am aware this belongs in no report, I am writing it here because 11 years of professional notation have apparently produced in me a compensatory pressure toward the kind of honesty that reports cannot hold. It was the most quietly extraordinary thing I have seen in a career that has placed me, with some regularity, adjacent to extraordinary things. Not the gown. Not the tiara. Not the light, or the diamonds, or the specific way the evening arranged itself around her like a frame around something that has decided it will be worth framing. The 3 words. I'm all right. Because here is the thing about those 3 words, which I have turned over for longer than I expected to turn them over. She said them to someone who already knew they were true, or close to true, or becoming true. She said them to someone who knew what the evening was costing and had been, all night, doing the invisible work of making that cost manageable. She said them to someone who knew her. And, the saying of them, the I'm all right of it, not the performance of all right, not the diplomatic rendering of all right for a room of hundreds, but, the plain 2-syllable truth of it spoken quietly in the margin of an evening, that was the realest thing I witnessed all night. I fell asleep at 4:17. I know this because when I woke at 5:53, the notation in my personal log was half finished, and, the pen had left a line where my hand had stopped mid-thought. The half-finished notation read, the question is not how she did it. I don't remember what the rest was going to be. The photographs appeared the next morning. They always do. I saw them on my phone while I was making coffee, which is a thing I am allowed to do. Observe publicly available media related to events I participated in securing, as a matter of situational awareness and professional context. I scrolled through them with one hand while the coffee brewed, and I looked at what the cameras had captured. The gold. The tiara. The warmth of the light on her hair. The way she turned toward a dignitary, full attention, present and, specific and, real. The Belgian official, caught mid-laugh at something she had said, slightly off balance in the way people are caught off balance by genuine delight. The photographs were beautiful. They were well composed, and they were accurate, in the sense that they showed things that had happened in a room I had also been in, and the things they showed had happened exactly as the photographs suggested. They were also, and this is not a criticism, this is simply the known limitation of the medium, incomplete. They didn't show the 3-inch door. They didn't show the woman with the garment bag, building the invisible architecture in a fluorescent lit corridor while the gilded room on the other side performed its version of the evening. They didn't show the half-second pause at the top of the stairs, the one that was not hesitation and was not nerves, the one that was a decision completed. They didn't show what I'm alright costs, or what it means to say it and, then, walk back and, sit down and, ask the minister to your left something that makes him lean forward, certain he is the most interesting person in the room. The caption under the most widely circulated photograph read, Princess Catherine captivates in an elegant gold gown with tiara and radiant hair at state dinner. I finished my coffee. I thought about the little girl with the French dessert, and the verdict she had delivered in the corridor with the matter-of-fact authority of someone who hadn't yet learned to mistake spectacle for substance. More like when something is real. I picked up my pen. I wrote the rest of the notation that I had left half-finished at 4:17. The question is not how she did it. The question is what we do with the fact that she did it. Whether we let that be only a photograph. Whether we are capable, when we see brightness, of understanding that brightness is a choice, and that some choices are made in the middle of a darkness we will never be shown and, never, probably, fully understand. I closed the log. I put on my uniform. I went back to work.